India itself and India studies. And that record has been convincingly critiqued. It is not that there haven't been, one of the refrains that we've heard in media, for example, is that they're making it out, as if she's being targeted unfairly, A, and B, they're saying that, if these people are feeling so outraged, for instance, Reena Nath Batra and various other groups sympathetic to him, or people who criticize Doniger, the issue is being made out as if, okay, so, why do you want why do you want to threaten Penguin with legal action? Why don't you write a critique? Enough and more critiques of Wendy Doniger's, almost all works of Wendy Doniger are available on the internet and elsewhere. Okay, in fact, perhaps one of the best critiques of Doniger and her school of scholarship is in the form of a book named Invading the Sacred, which is available for free as a PDF. Now, Hindus, whatever, those opponents of Wendy Doniger's method of scholarship, they've already demonstrated, they've already critiqued. So the deception here, the imbalance here also works to, sideline that or not to mention all the critiques that already exist of her work. So it is a deception that plays out there also. So that apart, now Doniger's record of scholarship, her worth, her credentials as an expert and scholar of Hinduism, has been convincingly critiqued by numerous scholars across the world, not just in India, but across the world, by, for example, first and foremost by Rajiv Malhotra, and then S.N. Balagangadhara, Swami Tyagananda from Ramakrishna Mission, Professor Emeritus Madan Lal Goyal, Poindexter, Ramesh Rao, and these are not ordinary scholars. I mean, they are accomplished people, and the record speaks for itself. And briefly, I can't obviously go in depth into this one, into their critique. So to give their critique, the main points of the critique in bullet points, Wendy Doniger frequently mistranslates Sanskrit terminology. She uses discredited psychological theories to study Hindu texts, primary Hindu texts. And she eroticizes almost everything in Hinduism, even when there is a sexual or erotic meaning does not exist. Now, for instance, which is the best source to find out, say, details of how Hindu temple architecture? Wendy Doniger looks at Kama Sutra for information on Hindu temple architecture. And other thing is that she had written an introductory article about Hinduism in Microsoft Encarta, which is no longer available. Microsoft has closed down that business line. But when it was there, MSN Encarta, she had written that piece on Hinduism, that essay on Hinduism. And there, she has described Holi as a festival of blood. And in our own experience here, is that how Hindus view Holi as a festival? No, it is a spring festival. Equally, she falsifies the history of India, especially that of the Muslim period, medieval Muslim period. And her perhaps her biggest contribution, if you want to call it a contribution, is that she has spawned an entire army of similar scholars. For example, Paul Courtwright, who wrote a book about Ganesha, where he calls Ganesha strung as a limp phallus. And Jeffrey Kripal, who says that Ramakrishna Paramahamsa sexually exploited Swami Vivekananda. And we have Sarah Caldwell and a host of other such scholars. So, long story short, Wendy Doniger's scholarship, apart from that, as an honest scholar, she has consistently refused to engage in debates with scholars who have critiqued her. What she has instead done is to simply brand them as fanatics and violent people. It is hardly a mark of scholarship. Anybody who critiques her work is a fanatic, basically. Now, this has parallels in India, as this phenomenon in the US academia has parallels in India, as we are well aware, and I shall touch upon that in a while. And it is basically one of shoddy and flawed scholarship, and one of labeling divergent and differing views and suppressing dissent. Now, to give a little more background about Wendy Doniger, as most of you might be aware, uh, most of the religious studies in US is controlled by a body called the AAR, or the American Academy of Religions, which is an extremely powerful body, because the recommendations, studies, and whatever the scholarly output that goes out from this body, AAR, is taken and considered for uh, policy making, as to how minority should be treated, and how the entire religious discourse should be there, should function in the across America. So she has been the head of AAR, and she's also a tenured professor in University of Chicago, along with another counterpart of hers named Martha Nussbaum. And so, given this kind of scholarship, she has literally tens of, if not hundreds of students who train under her for their PhDs or whatever degrees they have. So, unless they quote her, or they need their approval to get their degrees, basically. So, in that way, she's kind of established a near stranglehold over what constitutes Indology. So otherwise you won't get your degree. So even honest students who see some disconnect in what primary texts say versus what is taught, what they read as prescribed books, have no voice, and they are forced to play that game. In other words, she's created one entire ecosystem of gatekeepers of discourse in Indology. Now, on the other side, Islamic studies, the head of the Department of Islamic Studies, for example, is headed by a Muslim scholar. Similar is the case with Bible studies or Christian studies. Similar is the case with Jewish studies. It is only in the case of Indology and Hindu and India-centric studies that it is controlled by a non-native or a non-Indian or a non-Hindu. So this is one of the cruxes of the entire, surrounding this entire issue. As we see now, there is a similar parallel here in India as well, where, for example, I don't know how many of you have read eminent historians. So there, that is perhaps the best book to understand how the same phenomenon, how the same practice is prevalent in India, where a handful of scholars will have their set rules to approve what is proper scholarship, how history, what history is acceptable. The Romila Thapars of the world, in case you want names. Now, it's obvious, from this foregoing thing that there is shoddy scholarship and this flawed scholarship, and not everything is, straightforward. So the question that arises: such shoddy scholarship cannot occur in science. So why has it occurred in the humanities? That's a question I will leave to you. Now, in other words, what is at play here is that true learning and true scholarship has been sacrificed at the altar of politics. And this has resulted, and this political power, capture of political power, and its consequent application in academics, is at the root of this imbalance in public discourse. And decades of this kind of imbalance of, in scholarship, of politically motivated scholarship, has created a class of Indians who take pride in denigrating their own culture, their ancestors, their history, their heritage, and so on. Subconsciously, I don't know how many realize, actually, not in this room, but elsewhere in the larger public domain, is that Indians are learning about their own culture, their heritage, and their own identity about themselves from the eyes of other people. Like if I were to ask you, Abhinav, for example, who is the best person to talk to if I want to know about you?
Myself.
Right. So in this case, you draw an analogy here. Who are the best people to talk to know about India and Indians? Not Indians, but Wendy Doniger. So that is what is at play here. And this class and such scholars, they have reserved the right to critique other scholars while denying those other people the same right of criticism of their own work. So, and that explains the shrill support for Wendy Doniger. And almost all accounts, there's another factor at play here. Now, almost all accounts, all book reviews of her books in a mainstream, even in known scholars, peer-reviewed scholars, newspaper reviews, magazine book reviews of her books, they are all uniformly positive, right? Why? Again, it comes back to the same question of imbalance in public discourse, which suppresses critical reviews. I mean, nobody is asking you to publish, a derogatory review, but let the chips fall where they are. Right? It's a bad book. It's a poorly written book. Let it be. Why? When these scholars asked other people to expose their books for honest review and criticism, they should be able to take it when it comes to their own work. That is unfortunately not happening. So, in other words, this philosophy of suppression, this imbalance, calls for a degradation of scholarship, and the ensuing degradation itself justifies the philosophy. Now, neither is there call in the present case in this controversy. This call for this whole drum beating about free speech and ban and everything, it is not honest. Now, this class is trying most vociferously now. It has at least 5 decades of experience in flouting and stifling free speech with impunity. The best example of this is their record of calling for bans and supporting book and movie bans. A short list I can give. In 1924, a book called Angila Rasul, which basically spoke about Prophet Muhammad's various escapades, that was banned, and that author was stabbed to death. And the guy who stabbed has a monument in his name, a kind of dargah in his name in Pakistan. And almost all books critical of Jawaharlal Nehru and his dynasty. And then V.S. Naipaul's Area of Darkness. And then the famous satanic verses, which India has the dubious distinction of being the first country to ban. And same Salman Rushdie's The Move's Last Sight. This book was banned because it was not offensive to any religion or any god or anything. It was banned because it contains a character who has a pet dog whose name is Jawaharlal. And there is another book called The Calcutta Quran Petition, whose authors, it's a collection of court judgments and court petitions, which was, a petition was called to ban the Quran because it promotes enmity among different communities. So the authors of that petition and the publisher, they were hounded, all the copies were confiscated, burned, etc. under government orders. And yet another book called Understanding Islam Through Hadith was also banned. And more recently, The Red Sari by a Spanish author was banned because it is a fictional account based on the life of Sonia Gandhi. And these bans, in other words, more than 60 years of history of book ban by the same class of people who are now protesting falsely against what is a voluntary agreement between two people. And these bans were enforced primarily in 2 ways. One, by sheer political muscle. For example, the satanic verses. And 2, the threat of legal action. Section 153A, Article 19, First Amendment. And further, when, for example, Taslima Nasreen's books were banned and she was physically attacked, the same guys who are now standing up for Wendy Doniger, did not stand up for her, and they continue to refuse to stand up for her. She is hounded out of India, her visa did not get renewed, and nobody uttered a word. We can, of course, go on citing several such examples, but the one fundamental point remains. What we have is a selective application of free speech, which is simply another way of justifying dictatorship. It is just one step short of total dictatorship. So this class of people has no moral authority whatsoever to question or condemn Dinanath Batra, who simply took a leaf out of their own book, and their attack against Penguin books is equally hollow and equally hypocritical. But more importantly, it reveals their anxiety at losing their established dominance in public discourse, anxiety at the imbalance that is slipping away from their hands, and hence the attempts at characterizing the Wendy Doniger issue as a ban and a threat to free speech. These people, both Dinanath Mishra and Penguin, have used the law, and I don't know since when using the law has become synonymous with book ban or an attack on free speech. And besides, what are these people even criticizing? That Batra and Penguin adhere to the law? Is that itself a crime? So a truly open discourse and based on the high actual principles of free speech permits all views, good, bad, vile, offensive, ugly, excellent. It gives space to all kinds of discourse, all kinds of views. The idea being to arrive at the truth through reasoning, knowledge, erudition, etc. But then when these principles are substituted with organized intellectual bullying, which is what is happening now, when these principles are substituted with organized intellectual bullying, scholars become party line mouthpieces, they become ideological mouthpieces, and the students of these scholars become sheep, which reminds me of a saying by Edward Murrow, who said that a nation of sheep begets a government of wolves. And with that, I come to the end of my talk, and I once again thank India First and Abhinav and the rest of the team, and to all of you who took out your time to listen to me. Thank you.